You did everything right. You studied, you networked, you grinded through your 20s doing work you didn't love so that someday you'd land a salary that actually meant something. And you got there. $80,000. That's more than most Americans make. That's above the median. That used to mean a house, a car, a vacation, maybe a little left over at the end of the month. But here's what nobody told you when you finally crossed that number. It doesn't feel like $80,000. It feels like you're barely keeping your head above water. It feels like the number in your offer letter and the number in your bank account are living in completely different realities. It feels, if you're being brutally honest, like somewhere around $30,000. And you're not imagining it. That gap between what you earn on paper and what your life actually reflects isn't a personal failure. It's not a budgeting problem. It's not avocado toast. It's a system. And once you see how it works, you cannot unsee it.
Let's start with a number that should bother you more than it does. The U.S. median household income right now sits around $80,000 a year. That means roughly half of American households earn less than that and half earn more. By any statistical measure, 80 grand puts you solidly in the middle of the American dream. Except the American dream was priced in a different era. In 1980, the median home cost about $47,000. The median household income was around $21,000. That's a ratio of roughly 2.2 to 1. You could buy the median house for just over 2 years of median income. Today, the median home price just crossed $420,000. At $80,000 a year, that ratio is now 5.25 to 1. You'd need more than 5 full years of your entire gross income, not spending a single dollar on anything else, just to buy an average house. That's not inflation. That's a structural rearrangement of who gets to own things and who gets to rent them. But housing is just the beginning. To understand why your salary feels like it's been cut in half, you need to understand 3 forces that are working against you simultaneously. And the cruel part? Most people only see one of them. The tax reality nobody explains properly. Here's something your HR department glossed over during onboarding. Your $80,000 salary is not your $80,000 salary. Before you spend a dollar, before you buy a single thing, the federal government takes its cut. And because of how marginal tax rates work, most people either dramatically overestimate or dramatically underestimate what they actually lose. Here's how it actually breaks down in 2026 for a single filer. The first $11,600 or so is taxed at 10%. The next chunk, up to about $47,000, is taxed at 12%. Everything between $47,000 and $100,000 falls into the 22% bracket. So, on your $80,000 gross, your effective federal tax rate, what you actually pay as a percentage of your total income, lands somewhere around 16 to 17%. That's roughly $13,000 gone before you cash a single check. Then comes FICA. Social Security takes 6.2% of your wages. Medicare takes another 1.45%. That's another $6,100 off the top. Then state income tax. If you live in California, you're losing another 6 to 9%. New York, similar. Texas and Florida, you catch a break. But if you're in a high-tax state, add another $4,000 to $6,000. Run the math on that, and your $80,000 salary has already become somewhere between $55,000 and $61,000 in take-home pay, and you haven't bought groceries yet. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The tax code was last meaningfully restructured in 2017. Bracket thresholds get adjusted for inflation annually, but slowly, and the adjustments consistently trail real-world cost increases, which means the same purchasing power that once sat comfortably in a lower bracket now bumps against higher ones. Economists call this bracket creep. You probably just call it confusing. And here's the quiet irony embedded in all of this. The people writing those tax brackets have not lived on $80,000 in a very long time.
The inflation that never shows up in the headline number. You've heard the term CPI, Consumer Price Index. It's the official measure of inflation. It's what the Federal Reserve watches. It's what politicians cite when they tell you inflation is under control. It is also, depending on your life situation, almost completely disconnected from your actual experience of prices. Here's why. The CPI is a weighted basket of goods and services, and the weights matter enormously. Housing, for example, is measured using something called owner's equivalent rent, a hypothetical question asking homeowners what they think they'd charge to rent their own home. It's not based on actual transaction prices, it's a survey estimate. Which means the single largest expense most Americans have, shelter, is measured in a way that systematically understates how expensive it's actually become. Meanwhile, the categories that have genuinely exploded in cost over the last decade are exactly the categories that a 25 to 45-year-old is spending money on. Childcare, up roughly 220% since 2000, outpacing overall inflation by a factor of 3. Health insurance premiums. Average family premiums now exceed $24,000 a year. Let that land for a second. $24,000. Your employer covers part of that, but your share, the chunk deducted from your paycheck before you see it, has more than doubled in the last 15 years. Car insurance, up 22% in 2023 alone, not over a decade, in a single year. Auto prices. The average new car now costs over $48,000. The average used car is still above $28,000. A decade ago, you could get a reliable used car for $12,000. That market doesn't really exist anymore. And groceries. Since 2020, the cumulative increase in grocery prices is somewhere between 25 and 30%, depending on what you buy. Eggs, bread, beef, cooking oil, all structurally higher and not coming back down. So when the government reports that inflation is running at 3.2%, what they mean is that their specific basket of goods, measured in their specific way, is up 3.2%. What your actual life costs is a different question entirely. And for most people in the 25 to 45 demographic, people who are buying homes or renting in competitive markets, raising kids, driving to work, paying for health care, the real inflation rate has been running significantly hotter than the official figure for years. Your salary didn't fail to keep up with inflation. Your salary failed to keep up with your actual life.
The invisible costs that didn't exist before. This is the layer people talk about least, which is strange because it's the most insidious. There is a category of expenses that simply did not exist for your parents at your age, not because they were more frugal, not because they made better choices, because the infrastructure of modern American life now requires financial commitments that weren't even options 30 years ago. Start with student loans. Total U.S. student debt just crossed $1.77 trillion. The average borrower carries around $37,000. Monthly payments on that balance, depending on your repayment plan, can run anywhere from $300 to $600 a month. That's $3,600 to $7,200 per year, leaving your paycheck before you touch anything else. Your parents, statistically, didn't carry that. Then there's subscription infrastructure. This sounds trivial until you count it honestly. Streaming services, cloud storage, software subscriptions, professional memberships, gym memberships, news subscriptions, mental health apps, delivery service membership fees. The average American household now spends over $900 a year on subscriptions, and most people, when surveyed, dramatically underestimate their own total. The economy has been restructured to extract small, consistent amounts from you in ways that don't feel like expenses until you add them up.
Then there's the gig economy tax. If you do any freelance work, drive for a platform, sell anything online, or have any income outside a traditional W-2, you owe self-employment tax on that income at a rate of 15.3% on top of income tax. This catches a surprising number of people who thought they were supplementing their income and then get a tax bill that reframes the whole arrangement. And then there's retirement. Your parents likely had a pension, a defined benefit plan where they showed up, worked for 30 years, and received a guaranteed monthly check until they died. That model is functionally extinct in the private sector. What replaced it is a 401k, a defined contribution plan that shifts all the investment risk onto you, requires you to make sophisticated asset allocation decisions most people have never been trained to make, and depends entirely on market performance during the decades you happen to be working. Financial advisors broadly suggest contributing 15% of your gross income to retirement. On $80,000, that's $12,000 a year that, if you're being responsible, you mentally remove from your spendable income entirely. So, tally it up. Federal and state taxes take roughly $19,000 to $25,000. Health insurance premiums take another $3,000 to $6,000, depending on your employer. Retirement contributions, if you're being responsible, take $12,000. Student loan payments take $4,000 to $7,000. Subscriptions and digital infrastructure take another $900 to $1,500. Before you pay rent, before you buy food, before you fill your gas tank, you've already committed between $39,000 and $41,000 of your $80,000 salary. What's left is between $28,000 and $41,000 for everything else. Welcome to why it feels like $30,000.
The uncomfortable math. Here's where it gets philosophically interesting, not just financially frustrating. There's a concept in economics called real wages, your salary adjusted for inflation, representing actual purchasing power. By that measure, average real wages in the United States have grown painfully slowly over the last 2 decades. When adjusted for true cost of living increases rather than official CPI, some economists argue real wages for middle-income Americans have actually declined since the early 2000s. Declined, not stagnated, declined. Meanwhile, worker productivity has increased substantially over the same period. American workers produce more output per hour than they did 20 years ago. The economic value being generated went somewhere. It just didn't go evenly. Between 1979 and 2020, the top 1% of earners saw their wages grow by 160% when adjusted for inflation. The bottom 90% saw growth of about 26% over that same 4-decade span. The people in the middle, people earning $60,000 to $100,000, got squeezed from both ends. Too much income to qualify for safety nets, not enough to outrun the cost increases that were quietly repricing the American middle class out of the things that used to define it. And here's the piece that almost nobody talks about in polite company. The metric of success, the salary number, the offer letter, the LinkedIn headline, has not updated to reflect reality. $80,000 sounds like success because in 1998 it would have been success. The number carries the cultural weight of an era it no longer belongs to. But your landlord doesn't care about 1998. Your grocery store doesn't care about 1998. Your car insurance company raising your premium for the 3rd straight year definitely doesn't care about 1998. You are operating with an outdated map in a terrain that is fundamentally changed.
Zoom out for a second. This isn't just a personal finance problem. It's a structural feature of an economy that has, over several decades, shifted the burden of uncertainty downward. Healthcare risk used to be pooled across society through more comprehensive employer plans and was slowly redistributed to individuals through higher deductibles, higher premiums, and narrower networks. Retirement risk moved from pension funds, which held the risk institutionally, to individual investors, who now bear that risk personally. Housing risk, once cushioned by more accessible markets and stronger lending guardrails, now sits entirely with whoever can afford to get in. Education risk, once partially socialized through state funding of public universities, has been increasingly privatized through tuition increases and student debt. Each of these shifts happened gradually, with compelling arguments attached: efficiency, flexibility, individual choice. And in isolation, some of those arguments had merit. But the cumulative effect, experienced by a 32-year-old in 2026 trying to make an $80,000 salary stretch across all of these formerly socialized risks, is a financial life that feels inexplicably tight, even when the numbers should theoretically look fine. The system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was redesigned to do. It's just that the redesign happened mostly while you were in school, and nobody sent a memo.
So where does that leave you? You can optimize. You can budget more carefully, negotiate harder, invest more strategically, cut subscriptions, cook at home, refinance, side hustle, compound interest your way towards some version of financial stability. And those things genuinely help. This isn't a nihilistic conclusion. But there is something worth sitting with before you download another budgeting app. The generation that built the framework for what an $80,000 salary was supposed to mean, what it was supposed to afford, what life it was supposed to enable, did so in an economy with different housing prices, different healthcare costs, different education costs, and a fundamentally different risk distribution. They handed you the number without updating the instructions. And the deeper question, the one that doesn't have a clean answer, is whether any amount of individual optimization can fully compensate for a structural gap, whether the problem is that you need to budget better, or whether the problem is that the math was never designed to work the way you were told it would. $80,000 is not a bad salary. It's just that it's living in 2026 while parts of the economy are still priced like it's 1998. And other parts are priced like you already made it, even when you're still trying to figure out if you ever will. That tension isn't going away, and the people who design the next version of this economy, through policy, through markets, through the choices they make with whatever power they accumulate, will have to decide whether to acknowledge it or keep pretending the number still means what it used to. Whether they do that honestly is a question nobody can answer for you. What you can do is stop being surprised by the gap. You were always right about what you felt. The math just finally caught up to you.